really cool report. It's biennial, so it's the state of transportation planning. Um, Give us a little summary about what's going on in this 350-page report, which is of such an important topic like transportation advancement.
Absolutely. So every other year, the American Planning Association publishes this report, State of Transportation Planning, and they typically take a certain theme through their report. So this report just recently came out, and I picked it because for the first time, it actually refers to advanced air mobility. It talks about urban air taxis, etc. So I thought that was very interesting that that has now moved into their list of modes, along with Hyperloop and autonomous cars and tunnels, etc. The subtitle of the report is Interceptions and Identities, a Radical Rethinking of Transportation Experiences. The reason I picked this report, and I just want to kind of pull on some of the themes in the report and how they impact or work with advanced air mobility. Um, so the report starts off with a statement from Transportation Secretary Buttigieg. And what is clear is that a major theme that runs through this report is equity. And the reason it's important to kind of pull together this transportation planning world and advanced air mobility is that a lot of the work that we do is to educate planners about advanced air mobility. Advanced air mobility to date has come out of the tech side. It's been a tech push. It's come about through a convergence of technologies to allow industry to create these new aircraft. But in doing so, and in looking at the opportunities that are there for integration of aviation or this third dimension into transportation systems, we see the coming together of two communities that typically have not worked together. On the one side is aviation, which typically as a mode of transportation has operated on its own under federal regulation. And on the other side is the very local, regional, and statewide transportation planning and implementation and regulation process. So this report addressing it, which is whose audience is planners, is important in that it's bringing advanced air mobility into the picture. It's also really important for the advanced air mobility industry, the OEMs, the operators, etc., to understand the lens through which planners, transportation planners especially, will consider this mode.
So, kind of
Um,
two
yeah.
things there. One, this even thinking about equity in transportation seems like a shift in focus from what we might imagine this report being 20, 30 years ago. Um, but also, it seems like AAM is, on a completely separate line, is forcing the the joining of airspace considerations and transportation. Is this because the infrastructure itself actually has to be built to support AAM within urban environments?
Yes, in large part that is a piece of it. But I think even stepping back or going one level higher, I think what we're seeing is the idea that we would use aviation, that we'd use aircraft to move people in ways that typically, if they were going to move now, they would be using ground transportation. Whereas to date, we've used aviation primarily to cover longer distances in a much shorter time. Something that what we might use rail, but maybe rail wouldn't take you between point A and point B without going through C and D and taking much longer. But when you look at using aviation to connect within cities, between cities, even between urban areas and rural areas or suburbs, and to to connect to hub airports from outlying areas. Those are in many ways new uses for aviation. We've to date we've covered that with ground transportation, but it also means that aviation needs to intersect with those other modes. We see this now if you look at a regional transportation system. Light rail and buses talk to each other. They coordinate. Transportation planners look for ways to make seamless trips and really look at a trip from the perspective of the traveler, the complete trip from door to door. Aviation to date has never been a door-to-door or even part of a door-to-door system. It's been airport to airport. And of course, over the last X decades, that has become very much, at least in this country, a hub and spoke type system rather than a more broadly networked system. So yes, it is certainly looking at using aviation in a different way and integrating it with other modes of transportation.
Yeah, that's significant because we alluded to the San Francisco event. By the way, it was called The Future of Aviation. It was co-sponsored by Caltrans and UC Berkeley. Yolanka and her team at CAMI had a AAM 101 kind of co-located event to kick off the week on Monday. But this is so key what you said, Yolanka. So many of these planners, they don't have AAM on the brain, and conversely, the AAM crowd, they really need to understand that planning mindset. And this document bridges that gap, as do you and what you do with CAMI in having these AAM 101 conversations with local governments. As I think through this, North Central Texas Council of Government is one crowd that's been doing a lot of great stuff. But Ohio, they were the first ones to put out that roadmap, right? We're going to get to that in a second. But Rex, that's your piece you want to talk about. But before we get to the roadmap, I'd like your thoughts on what Yolanka has presented.
No, Yolanka brings up some excellent points, and in working with CAMI for the last couple of years, I think one of the challenges we see at the local level is the disconnect between land use and airspace use. And there's two completely different languages and two completely different audiences. So when we work on people moving in the aviation spectrum that never have, and that was one of the things that was brought out in the Ohio, that how many people have never ever flown before. And to add this next layer of aviation, which is the shorter distance we've never done before, public acceptance is going to be a challenge. So in looking at where we're going in the future, I think what CAMI is looking at from the equity and the equality standpoint of transportation availability, it's going to be huge at the local level specifically. I don't see it being too broad at the federal level, but it's going to be a game changer at the local level that needs to be paid close attention to. So I applaud all the work that CAMI's doing in that space and trying to engage the local municipalities, because getting them to learn the language of aviation for land use is key to having good ordinances and a good path forward